Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the L. Ron Hubbard Theater in Hollywood, California. Tonight we present a live broadcast of the Golden Age Radio Hour featuring L. Ron Hubbard's Western story, The Toughest Ranger. The Arizona sun beat down upon the dun plain and baked the tired trees which drooped about the Dobie ranch house. The road, little more than 2 wagon tracks, was endless, that road, endless and dry and hot, and down it came Petey McGuire, leading his horse, a little sorrel named Pat. Petey McGuire's high heels were run over, his Stetson was shapeless, jeans were worn through at the knees, and about his waist hung suspended from a scraped leather an old peacemaker pistol. His young face was haggard and coated with a pasty mixture of dust and sweat. His eyes were hopeless. Pat, with lowered head, limped after him. The little sorrel's flanks were white with dried lather. His coat was roughened and spotted with cockleburs. Pat, oatless all these many weeks, was a dead horse unless he got rest and care. Shuffling with weariness, slogging through the dust, they came to the ranch house gate just as a thick-set fellow rode out. The stranger would have ridden straight by if Petey had not stopped him, but Petey did with a pleading gesture.
Mister, I gotta have a job. I gotta get to Pat's chute and get him some oats in him before...
Not hiring anybody. Not like you.
Petey blinked and felt anger redden his face.
We need some rest, that's all. I can punch cows. I thought this newer country would be better than
Oh, it
Kansas.
ain't a question of punching cows. It's a question of punching rustlers. What I need is fighting men.
With a flick of his quirt, the ranch owner sent his mount forward, and with the abruptness of his departure was an insult to Petey.
Saddle tramp. That's all I am, a saddle tramp. Damn him. How the hell does he know I can't fight? How?
Pat was standing with his left ear forward, listening.
Yeah, just a kid. Just nobody. No jobs for a guy that can't spit smoke.
He led onward, slower, more hopeless than before. Mile after mile after mile, and above the scorching sun hammered molten arrows into Petey's back. But he would not ride. He would not further abuse the only friend he had. On the run from Kansas, on the run for 1,000 miles. In Kansas, a foreman had thrashed him thoroughly just because Petey had spoken up. On the run from a father who had been something less than kind. On the run from a beating he still winced to remember. And now at 24, he was still on the run, job to job, beating to beating.
Yeah. Saddle tramp.
Oh, he'd like to kill them, all of them. The foreman who'd thrashed him, the other endless others who'd plagued him. And always the reason had been the same. Always he had been too soft.
Yeah, saddle tramp.
He taught Pat tricks, clever tricks, and when the punchers had laughed at him because he talked to Pat and told him dreams, well, yeah, sure, he cried.
Saddle tramp.
He was too soft-hearted, that was all. He couldn't stand to see men and beasts suffer. He couldn't stand jeers. By now, it was strange the way the sun affected him. His mouth was curled down in a bitter grimace. He'd like to kill them. Everyone. They didn't call him Petey. No, they called him Sweetheart and Mary. His feeling within him was strange. Before he had tried to excuse them, but now he wanted to kill them from what they'd done to him for 24 years. Petey felt the surprise of feeling such a thing. It was foreign to him. He was no fighting man. But never before had Petey felt this helpless, blind rage against the world which wouldn't have him in it, the world which drove him on, the world which was now trying to kill Pat. He did not know how far he went as his legs were numb and walking mechanical. But when he looked up, he was on the outskirts of a small pueblo. The biggest building in it was a fort-like adobe structure which presented an arched gate to the road. There was a sign up out that gate. The Arizona Rangers. Petey stopped, hardly seeing the sign at all. In this town, he knew he could swab out a bar for food. He could clean up a stable, but Pat had to have shoes and oats and a few weeks' rest. Pat pushed ahead a staggering step and shoved his muzzle into Petey's chest.
Yeah, I know. I'm hungry too.
He went toward a saloon and wrapped Pat's reins about the hitch rack. Petey stepped through the doors and into the dim interior. The bartender was shining up glasses. He took one look at Petey, which marked him for what he was, saddle tramp.
Beat it. We got a swamper. There ain't no room for Cristobal for a saddle tramps.
Look.
You better do the looking. Captain Shannon locks up every man that can't pay his way. He's cleaning up the country. He's tough. Toughest ranger in the state. You better take my tip. Beat it.
You mean just because I'm broke, he locked me up?
Well, why not?
A chill of terror took Petey. He turned around and went out into the street. He stopped with Pat's reins in his hand and stared at the big adobe building which was marked with a sign, the Arizona Rangers. He knew what he faced. If they locked him up, they wouldn't take care of Pat. But he couldn't go on. No, he couldn't take to the desert again. That way lay death. And here was death for Pat. Petey swallowed hard. Suddenly, he wanted to hit somebody. Anybody. He wanted to lash out and slay these ghosts which had stalked him for 24 years. His rage began to mount. They had no right to do this to him, no right to kill Pat by loosening him on the waterless desert. Pat needed care. Suddenly, Petey McGuire felt cold. His wits felt like crystal in his head. He was not shaking. He had felt himself grow taller. And the experience did not even surprise him. His young face was set, and his eyes were suddenly hard. They couldn't kill Pat. He knew what he could do. He found himself leading Pat across the road to the adobe gates. Petey was without any fear of anything. He snapped at the leather-faced sentry.
Where's Shannon?
He did not recognize his own voice. The sentry jerked his thumb toward another archway within. Petey, leading Pat, went toward it. He could see a man beyond. Well, that must be Shannon. Half of Petey was suddenly scared to death, but the other half of him would not stop walking. He dropped Pat's reins and stalked into the office with a careless, impudent swagger. Captain Shannon looked up, annoyed, starting to stamp the collar by his dusty, torn clothing, but Petey was without fear now. Nothing could stop Petey, not even himself.
My name's McGuire. Petey McGuire. You've heard of me.
Shannon started to make a biting remark, but Petey rushed on without any help from Petey.
Petey McGuire. From Kansas City to New Orleans? What I say goes. I'm so tough, I'd give a rattler nightmares. You're Shannon, and I hear you need tough guys. Well, you ain't got nobody around here that'd stand up to me.
I don't think
Hell, you're trying to tell me you've never heard of Petey McGuire? Go on, I ain't in no mood for telling funny stories. Where's my badge and where's my bunk? And don't take all day about it.
Petey was scared down. He was so scared he expected Shannon to leap at him from across that battered desk, but Shannon looked at the dusty, hard-faced, reckless fellow with a twisted grin on his mouth and a swagger in the way he stood. He knew his own reputation, and now that he was getting old, he was guarding it. He had made enemies in his day, and this tough-talking kid had more brass than anybody Shannon had seen for many a year. Shannon's reputation was such as to demand respect, and here was a young whippersnapper.
So you're tough, are you, Sonny?
The name's McGuire. Petey McGuire. And if you ain't heard of me, you don't know nothing. Where's the badge and the bunk?
Shannon scratched his jaw and squinted up a cold gray eye. He was amused. He could read this kid like a book. Youngster putting on a front, nothing more. When the guns began to go, well, Shannon had a sense of humor.
Hunter'll show you the bulk. We'll see about you later.
Petey found out that he was going out of the door. He went up to Pat and blindly bumped into something feminine beside the pony. Petey discovered it was a girl, but the roll which had dropped over him like a coat of chainmail would not desert him now.
Look where you're going.
The girl was astonished. She was a little thing, perhaps 20. She was fragilely beautiful. Her lovely eyes were wide as she backed up.
I'm sorry. Well, I was looking at the pony. He's been ridden very hard.
Yeah.
And she did something she had never done before in her life. She flashed at him.
You ought to be ashamed of yourself killing a horse that way.
Blah.
Said the devil inside Petey McGuire. She backed up again, and he led Pat toward her, so that she had to step out of the way again. She was tight-lipped with fury, but he gave her not another glance. And back in the office doorway, Captain Shannon looked bleakly at the departing rider and mount, and then back at his daughter, Beth. Shannon's reputation was great. He had one thing in this world which was worth having, one thing which he protected so fiercely that the object itself was stricken with awe of him. He looked at his daughter, Beth, and then back at the vanishing McGuire. Beth walked toward the office slowly, not saying.
Well, never mind. I'll get him for that.
Oh, no, he was tired. I told him.
She was stopped by the searching stare which her father gave her. Guiltily, she turned and walked down the veranda. And when she turned a little to see if McGuire was still in sight, Shannon was still staring at her. Ten days later, the demon still possessed Petey McGuire. He had been very shaky at first. The range-toughened rangers had tried to put him to the test with jesting any new recruit will get. He'd looked them in the eye and had told them to go to hell. And now they nodded to him pleasantly and stayed clear of him generally. Respect was a new thing to him. It made him feel more than a little drunk. He swaggered around the barracks and compound, ever watchful and swiftly overbearing if any man crossed him. He was McGuire, but he wasn't McGuire, and never before in his life had he suspected his own double identity. He'd been most busy dodging fights, and now he had learned that if he kept up his front, the fights would begin to dodge him. Now and then a traitorous thought hit Petey. One of these days somebody was going to call his bluff, and then... and he didn't know whether he could deliver or not. That worried him, not a little. He became aware of an audience and then turned to see Beth Shannon standing on a runway under the wall, watching him. She had a wide-brimmed hat on her head, and the effect made her face smaller than ever, made her eyes even bigger. Evidently, she had something to say, but she was having a hard time getting enough courage to approach and talk. After a while, he knew that Beth Shannon was standing about 5 feet behind him as her slim shadow barely touched Petey's own. Petey was in the grip of a devil. He couldn't help himself. He turned cockily about and said,
Well?
His other half blinked in amazement. The old Petey usually got struck dumb in the presence of good women.
I'm sorry what I said, Mr. McGuire. Your horse, you've done nothing but take care of him for 10 days. That and shoot a target. I was wrong, I guess, about you riding your horse on purpose that way and almost killing him.
Yeah. I'm glad you found out you were wrong.
The old Petey drew a long breath, and the new Petey grinned and said,
I may have buried a lot of men in my time, but I don't kill horses. Them as says Petey McGuire is tough also knows that Petey McGuire is kinda animals. I don't hold it against you. Any woman is going to be wrong once in a while.
Well, you lack yourself, don't you?
This was a blow to the old Petey, and he countered swiftly by wanting to be humble and beg her pardon and tell her, oh, how badly that he... But the new Petey said...
Sure, I'm good, and I know I'm good. What's wrong with that?
She walked away from him, and he watched her go. The old Petey wanted to call her back and run after her, and the new Petey just stood still and admired the way her riding skirt swung from side to side.
What the hell did I do that for?
A new shadow fell across Petey's shoulder.
Still tough.
Petey whirled and looked at the granite visage of the man. There was something horribly impersonal in Captain Shannon, just as though he could shoot a fellow down and read a sermon without giving the matter another thought. The man was all gray and cold.
Yeah?
And still cocky. Look here, McGuire. I let you in on the chance that you might be half as good as you say you are.
I'm better.
Yeah? Well, be that as it may, youngster. But there's an unwritten rule around here that men take off their hats and say, "Yes, ma'am," to Miss Shannon.
Yeah?
Yes. And when Miss Shannon is around, and men are not supposed to flirt with her and then try to insult her. Is that clear?
Yeah.
And hereafter, you are not to talk to Miss Shannon.
And if I do?
You'll have me to deal with, McGuire.
The old Petey's shocked eyes heard him laughing cynically at Shannon. Shannon froze and his gray eyes froze and old Petey froze, but the new Petey went on laughing.
Shut up! You're nothing but a damn cocky kid. You don't know enough to be scared of anything. You've been burning up ammunition in practice, and now you're gonna have your chance to burn it up in earnest.
Shannon had not thought he would say this, but here he was saying it. Petey infuriated him beyond endurance.
We haven't got time to lie around. The cattlemen are howling for us to take rustlers out of business before the rustlers take the cattlemen out of business. Most of this troop is out now. All right, Mr. Jehovah McGuire, I got 2 hours ago news that Brad Thompson is in Grande Piedras. If you're so tough, go get him.
The old Petey's knees began to knock. Thompson was a gunman of the Shannon caliber, but the new Petey spoke up.
Sure. Nothing to it. I don't even want help, and I'll have him back here at sundown.
He turned his back on Shannon and reached up to take Pat's saddle from its peg. Shannon looked at Petey squared back with slight misgivings. Maybe this kid wasn't a bluff after all. Grande Piedras was a collection of adobe huts along one bank of a river which contained more blue boulders than water. It was a stone's throw from the border, and here were assembled most of the gentlemen who did an uncomfortable business in other people's beef. Petey felt pretty small on Pat's back, but he looked most competent and belligerent. He had fought a battle with himself about unpinning the ranger star from his vest and putting it in his pocket, but the new Petey was driving the old Petey hard, and so the star glittered like a target. Petey stopped Pat outside the saloon and got down. He found that the place was dark and almost deserted. When his eyes adjusted to the light, he walked along the bar until he stood at the far end in such a position that he could duck if he had to, but that was only the old Petey taking precautions as ever. The new Petey not only owned the place, but the bartender's soul. The gambler's holdout, the church in the square, the entire Pueblo, Arizona, the United States, the world, the solar system, and the universe. Petey cocked his foot up upon the bar, cocked his hat over his eye, cocked his head at the bartender, and said definitely,
Give me a shot of carbolic acid, and don't go diluting it none with strychnine.
Petey saw that half a dozen men at the gaming table were staring at him. They were not very savory people, those men. Their beards were black and white and gray, but all unshaven and untrimmed. Their hands holding chips had trigger figures bent from long habit. They were, in short, the toughest fellows old Petey had ever seen in his life. Undoubtedly, one of them was Brad Thompson. Petey sloshed down the drink down his throat, and the old Petey tried to cough, and the new Petey growled.
Look here. I didn't come to this town to play patty cake with a bunch of sissies like them gents over at that table.
The men at the table stiffened. A sheep herder who had been asleep against the wall suddenly woke up, stared aghast at Petey, and then slid like an eel out the door to immediately start running despite the heat. Petey's grin would have made a wolf die of heart failure.
I come to this town to generally work upon a gent named Brad Thompson, a penny ante, tin horn, and a coyote-hearted chicken thief. I come to this town alone because I likes action. And if Petey McGuire come to town with company, there wouldn't be no action. You've heard of me? Yeah, sure you have. Petey McGuire, the terror of Mississippi, the scourge of Kansas, and now the pride of the Arizona Rangers.
How the old Petey shivered at that invitation to death. The new Petey surveyed the room, pushed back the brim of his hat, took out his gun, pinwheeled it, tossed it up, kicked out his hip, and the 6-gun slid into his holster.
If Brad Thompson ain't scared to show himself, he's going back to Cristobal, dead or alive. Petey McGuire don't care which.
A shadow was in the doorway. The old Petey saw a fellow in a frock coat standing there. The man's eyes were 2 live coals burning in the center of his head, and his lips were pulled back to display long, sharp teeth, dazzling white. The fellow was hung together so loosely he looked like a rattlesnake wearing boots.
Was somebody paging me?
Said Brad Thompson hopefully. Petey straightened up with an insolent grin.
Yeah, you and me are going to take a trip, and it's up to you, fella, whether you'd go tied across the saddle or sitting up straight.
Brad Thompson took his choice with such suddenness that Petey barely had time to duck behind the bar before a bullet broke his glass into a flash of white light, and Brad Thompson's smoke was so thick before him that he fired 3 times at the place where Petey had been. Another gun spoke about a foot above the floor, and Thompson did a dance step on the order of a pirouette to bring up hard against the wall. He tried to catch the gun as it fell from his right hand, and the effort unbalanced him. He thudded prone upon the floor.
Keep your seats, gentlemen. Your esteemed fellow citizen don't need no company in the hospital.
The citizens kept their seats. Petey walked over and hauled Brad to his feet. The man's shoulder was punctured and his head bruised from hitting the wall. Petey shook some life into him and then marched him out of the saloon. Petey looked at Pat and winked, and some dust got in Pat's eye, and he winked back. Captain Shannon sat at his desk. He laid his watch on the scarred top, and it ticked loudly in tune to a locust which ticked monotonously in the fragrant night. The hands were slowly clenching at midnight. His mind persisted in running over and over the same ground. The kid was just a bluff. The kid had to be just a bluff. He had lied it out for California already and would never touch Cristobal again. The kid had to be a bluff. And then came a far-off sound which steadily grew into 8 hoofs on the hard road. 8 hoofs as 2 mounts came at an even walk. Well, it must be Cole and Stevens come back after their check on the bank job at Russell. Yeah, that was it. It had to be Cole and Stevens. In the compound, the 2 mounts stopped, and the first one's saddle creaked, and then the other. 4 feet sounded on the adobe pavement without the door, and 2 spurs were merrily jingle-bobbing, and 2 heels were listless and shuffling. The door was flung back. The kid was standing there with a cocky swagger to his shoulders, with an insolent grin upon his lips, and the kid was holding up, gray-faced and scared, Brad Thompson.
You didn't need to stay up. Hell, don't you think Petey McGuire can take care of these things by himself? Huh? Come on, Thompson. Don't get so shaky in the knees. I won't hurt you.
Thompson flicked his eyes from the kid to Shannon as a rattler flicks out his forked tongue.
Yeah, you got me now, sure. But you can't do nothing with me, neither of you. You can lock me up, but you can't prove a damn thing on me.
Calm down. Well, Pop, do I have to put him away too?
It was a challenge. Shannon knew it. The 3 rangers of the guard had crowded into the door behind Petey, their leathery faces taut with surprise as they looked at Thompson.
Randolph, lock Thompson up and get a doctor for him. I'll talk to him in the morning.
The 3 rangers advanced and took Thompson, who tried to push them off. They pulled him out of the office and they were gone. Petey stood still there. But now he advanced and sat on the edge of the desk. Petey built himself a cigarette as he spoke.
Pop, you thought you had me. Yeah, you thought you had Petey McGuire, but you didn't know nothing. It was a cinch. I invited the whole damn town to a war, and this Thompson was the only one that dragged his iron. And so I had to plug him on an even break. There wasn't no use to kill him, so I took the soft muscle in his shoulder, about 1/4 of an inch above his collarbone, and slammed him on his back against the wall. And here he is.
Shannon said nothing.
Pop, you ain't any judge of men. I hear you was once the roughest, toughest ranger in Arizona. But you're slipping. You're getting bald and blind. You got the place buffaloed. But they don't know the truth that you couldn't hit the broadside of a barn door. You're just about through, Shannon. You had me on a spot. You thought. Well, I come back. And before this year is done, yeah, you expect to be made the head of all the Rangers, but you won't never be. I'm out for that job, Shannon. I'll get that job because compared to me, you're about as lethal as a mesquite bush.
He got up, blew smoke through the gloom, and then jingle-bobbed carelessly to the door. He slammed it behind him. Shannon was still. He had not yet started to think. And then he heard Bet's voice outside. Bet sounded like she wanted to cry.
You got back, Petey. I knew Thompson would try to kill you. I knew it.
Petey was most casual.
Look here, sweetheart. Don't go running around in this night air without a jacket. Me? I'm tough. And you're wasting your time worrying about me. Don't worry. Just look and admire. Now, get back to bed before something happens to you.
The voices faded away, and Shannon sat still. He stared at the place Petey had sat. Shannon's cold gray eyes were growing hot.
So you're out for my job. So I'm Pop, and I'm old, and you're going to get the chief ranger's job before the year is done.
Speaking to himself, he saw a sudden vision of Bet, saw her in Petey McGuire's eyes, looking worshipfully up at him. He saw Bet left and lost and alone, and he saw himself done and dead and unable to help her. He saw his own wife in her casket, and suddenly his own face, a young face with an insolent grin, looking at the slip of a girl and telling her she'd belong to him someday. Yeah, he'd won her. He'd won her, and then to protect her, he had become the toughest man in the Southwest. And now Bet was going the same route, but with a rotten guide. Petey McGuire could never love Bet. He was not worthy of Bet. For 20 years, Shannon had tried to shield that girl. He had protected her gruffly from the ruthless hands of lawless men, and he would protect her now. Petey McGuire was shallow and rotten, a man without a heart. He'd take what he wanted and throw the girl aside, and Shannon would not be there to help her. He knew with a blinding flash of light that he was done, did Shannon. He was done as long as McGuire lived. For his whole life, Shannon had been fighting on the side of the law, and the law had been behind him. And enemies were there, too many enemies to be counting. And if at last those merciless and revengeful men knew that Shannon had been bested by an insolent kid, they would come and try their luck, afraid of the gunman reputation no longer. All he had to do was wait. P.D. McGuire had gotten Thompson, but there were harder, more murderous jobs. Many jobs wherein it would be impossible for one man alone to do his work and come back alive. Brad Thompson was not unintelligent. He had been a little of everything before he had seen great profit in selling other people's beef. He had been too often double-crossed for him to have any faith in humanity, and so he was nervous and suspicious, and more than once he had drawn and shot before any real menace had been visible in a man. His killings had mounted, and now Brad Thompson knew that he would soon see how it felt to walk up 13 steps and dangle his rattlesnake body from a noose while his spurs jingled from dancing lightly upon the air. He knew he was done, and that made him think hard and fast. He let the wound heal under care for a week. It stiffened his arm, and always his arm would be stiff, but he let them pay the doctor bill, and in the cell practiced a left draw without a gun. Nobody saw him. He was most docile. He joked with a ranger sentry, and all in all, made himself pleasant. And that night, Johnson, the ranger sentry on duty at the moment, took Brad his supper. 5 hours later, they found Johnson with his head crushed down into his face, sprawled out in Brad's empty cell. And Brad had vanished. By half-troops, rangers searched the country. Singly, they scouted the towns. Grimly, they watched and listened for news of Thompson. They got it often enough. All of it was bad. He was still in the country, but if he had been a desperate man before, he was a howling devil now. And from May until mid-July, the reign of Brad Thompson went on in full swing. And Shannon had lost count of the dead men found in burned ranches and strong boxes lost from the overland stage. And through the country echoed Thompson's repeated statement that he was hopefully waiting to kill a man named P.D. McGuire. Shannon stepped out on the veranda before his office and looked across the dim compound. He had expected P.D. McGuire was sitting on the barrack steps, all alone, looking at a lighted window in Shannon's house and dreaming dreams.
McGuire!
P.D. stood up with a start. He had been a universe away. That was the old P.D., and the new P.D. had been asleep. But now the new P.D. woke up with a snap and began to saunter idly down the sidewalk toward the yellow rectangle upon which Shannon was silhouetted. Shannon watched with narrow disapproval, withdrawing as P.D. approached so that when P.D. entered, the ranger captain was entrenched behind his desk. P.D. sat down in a rawhide chair, dangling one spurred boot as he indolently lighted a cigarette.
You had something to say to me?
Shannon pushed his lamp back a couple of feet and then looked squarely at P.D., finding it difficult to look McGuire in the eye.
McGuire, there's a new governor coming out to take charge of the territory.
Why tell me? Think maybe I can talk him into making you chief of the Rangers?
Shannon let the challenge pass.
He'll be coming by overland stage, and he'll be here within the next 2 weeks. I want to have this section of country quieted down before he arrives.
So he'll appoint you to the top post.
Shannon went on, but he was not looking Petey in the eye at all now. He was twisting a hunting knife around and around on his desk, an action most unusual for nerveless Shannon.
McGuire, Brad Thompson is still on the loose. He's collected about 15 men of the worst kind, and rustling doesn't interest them as much as payrolls and gold.
Petey said not a word. He couldn't.
And I had an idea that a tough man like yourself might succeed where half the troop might fail. Where it has failed,
Still, Petey, he could not push a word out of his tight throat.
We know fairly definite that Thompson is holding out in Buell Canyon, and he can run away if too many try to attack the place.
He couldn't look up at Petey at all now.
If one man were to attempt to arrest Thompson, he might succeed. And as you happen to be convinced that you are the toughest man in Cristobal, you can go get Brad Thompson again. Alone.
Petey didn't say anything for minutes. Shannon did not look up. Suddenly, the old Petey knocked back the new Petey and spoke nervously.
Last time it was different. Thompson was alone in Grande Piedras. But this time, he's in the middle of a gang. One man couldn't walk in on him. He'd get killed.
Shannon was silent for a long time. And then he raised his head and gave Petey a stabbing glance.
You wouldn't be scared, would you, Mr. Petey McGuire?
Petey sat still, and his cigarette smoldered untouched. Shannon pushed his advantage.
You wouldn't be showing the white feather, would you, Mr. Toughest Ranger?
Petey put both feet on the floor. He felt sick to his stomach, and Shannon's desk was leaping up and down, and the room was whirling.
Sure, a man might get killed doing it, but Petey McGuire couldn't be scared of anything.
Shannon sat back, almost smiling.
All you do is walk into Buell Canyon and yank Thompson out of his crowd, or kill Thompson in his crowd. Certainly 15 gunslingers wouldn't stop Jehovah McGuire.
He's been saying everywhere that he'd kill me on sight.
Oh, certainly, and you've got your chance to call him a liar and show him that he can't kill you.
They didn't speak for more than 5 minutes. Petey sat hunched forward. He couldn't talk. In the quarters upstairs, a light footstep sounded, repeated, and then was gone. Suddenly, Petey looked up, and he knew that it had been Beth. Suddenly, Petey got to his feet. With a grin on his face was grisly in contempt. He walked forward and sat down on the edge of Shannon's desk and leaned forward, his coat jutting away from his thigh and glittering in the lamplight. His eyes had aged a score of years.
I understand now, Shannon. I understand. You're scared, that's all. Scared. You think I'll get your job. You think I'll steal your girl. You think I'm rotten all the way through, but instead of coming out with it like a man, you're using your job to kill me.
It was neither the old nor the new Petey speaking. It was a man whose throat was acrid as he tasted death.
You've been waiting for this. Sure. You think I can kill Thompson, but you know I'll never get back alive.
Petey got up, gave his cartridge belt a hit. His gaze on Shannon was bleak as Shannon's own.
And if I show the white feather, then you've also got me. You can.
He stopped. A footfall had sounded on the second floor again. Petey put his fists down on Shannon's desk.
You know what's going to happen, but it won't. I'm going to get out to get Brad Thompson so you can make a show for the new governor. But I promise you, Shannon, I promise you that I'll come back. I'll get through, and I'll come back to Cristobal and take your girl and your job.
He stood up straight and hitched at his belt again.
Yes, yeah, I think I'll do that, Shannon.
Petey about-faced and walked to the door. Shannon stared at the squared shoulders, and suddenly Shannon wanted to yell at Petey to come back, but he didn't. For 2 weeks, no word came to Cristobal about Ranger Pete McGuire, and the tension grew. For 2 weeks, Captain Shannon listened with but half an ear to reports, reviewed with but half an eye, and spoke with only half his thoughts. From midnight until midnight, he gave attention to the big arched gate and watched for a sorrel horse or for a wide swinging rider to come and say that a man was dead, and that man was Petey McGuire. For the first few days, Shannon justified himself to the best of his ability. The boy was a braggart. On the Owl Hoot Trail, McGuire had nothing inside of him but glory of McGuire. And to let such a man challenge his job and to let such a man crush the thing he held most dear? Nah, Shannon was not built that way. But a thing happened. Bet Shannon sat silently across the long dining table, white of face in contrast to the gay Mexican pottery, her gaze fixed upon the plate she had not touched. Hoofbeats sounded on the road outside the fort. Bet was up and at the window throwing back the drapery before Shannon knew that she had even risen. But it was only a mounted messenger from Prescott, and from the way he rode, he had no news of importance. Bet came back to the table. Suddenly she lifted her gray eyes to his, and he was startled at the brilliance of them, at the strength behind them.
Are you keeping any news from me?
No, nothing's happened that I know about. Colin Stevens...
Damn Colin Stevens. You know what I mean. Where is Petey McGuire?
Shannon stared at her. He didn't like what he saw. He had never thought she could get angry. She stood up, trembling, but not from anything but the violence of the storm within her. Her head was proud and her small mouth courageously set.
Are you holding back what you know?
Now, don't get so upset, Bet. He's merely doing his duty, accepting the challenge of Thompson, and if McGuire is as good as he says he is, all is going well.
You're lying. I know what you did, and I know why you did it. You ordered him out alone. You ordered him out on a job when you should have sent your entire troop. You sent him to die because you hate him, because you're afraid of him.
He tried to stop her. He had never known that such depths of emotion lay within this girl. She had always been so obedient to him, always so anxious to please him.
Bet, please. You gotta
I've been afraid of you all my life. I've tried to reach you, and you've held me off. I've been ordered around like one of your troopers. I couldn't talk to people you didn't want me to talk to. I had to wear the dresses that you liked. Yes, I've been afraid of you. And why not? You're a granite mountain without any heart. You're a killer so cold that you would send a kid out to die just because you were afraid of what that boy might do. Oh, yes, you did.
A duty?
Began Shannon, but he got no farther. Her scorn was like flashing lightning.
Duty. What do you know of duty? You're Shannon. Shannon the killer. Ranger or outlaw, it makes no difference. You're proud of your record. And when a slim boy comes with courage enough to challenge you, then you won't even give him the break about which you brag. Oh, no. You use your authority to send him out to die.
Bet!
Bet! What am I, a trooper? Bet! Yes, squads right and wheel left and right front into line. That's all you know. But I'm no trooper. I'm a woman, and I can't be broken. Oh, you almost did break me. Yes, almost. And then a kid named Petey McGuire came and gave me back my soul.
He stood up so suddenly that he knocked over his chair.
Go to your room!
You haven't nerve enough to touch me. You can't touch me because you know I'm right.
Shannon mastered himself.
He volunteered.
And so you can lie about it.
You accused
Never
me...
mind what I accuse, because I know. I know, Captain Shannon. At midnight, too many days ago to remember, Petey McGuire was saddling his horse in the stables. I heard you downstairs. Yes. I listened to you and heard everything that was said. And I went to the stables and found Petey. Braggart, is he? Heartless, is he? No courage has he? Those things are lies. Petey went after Thompson, and he's still after him or dead, Captain Shannon. But Petey McGuire left this fort after...
Beth!
And he told me. He told me what he was and why he was. And after he had told me, he was gone. And Captain Shannon, if Petey McGuire does not come back alive, all of Arizona is going to know that the iron-hard Shannon is yellow-dogged at heart.
She turned and walked to her room. And long after the door had slammed, Shannon stared at it. He stared at it bleakly. McGuire he'd won. Yes, dead or not, McGuire had won, and everything for which Shannon had thought he stood became a crumpled ruin. His reputation, his girl, his life, they were in the hands of a kid named Petey McGuire, a kid that had cried against the breast of a girl. It was hot beside the two wheel tracks which made the road. It was hot, and up on high a buzzard, scenting death, wheeled and wheeled on muted rings to watch the lone rifleman who lay between the two boulders. The sun had baked through Petey's vest, through his shirt, through his back, and down to his star. He had waited 4 hours. The Overland stage had been robbed 4 days before. It had been robbed 2 weeks before. It had been robbed a month before, and each time it happened in the most likely spot west of the last spot. And it would be here, if anywhere, that the overdue stage would be halted by Brad Thompson. On the stage would be an extra guard, but messengers had their own ideas about the value of their lives, despite the pep talks given them by Wells Fargo agents. The road was 30 feet below Petey. No one could see him, except from above, and only that expectantly hungry buzzard was in the blue. It was an ideal spot, and Brad Thompson had already picked it out. The tracks of his riders on inspection of the place had been clear to Petey. Men had ridden to this place, dismounted for a surveil, and then had picked posts. They had mounted again to ride on. The whole story was down there in the sand. And it was noon, and the sun was unbearable, and the place was so still that the silence rang monotonously. The sound of hoofs came gradually down the trail. Petey stayed down listening. He heard the cavalcade arrive, and then Brad Thompson's voice issuing crisp and nervous orders.
Move it!
Dismounted men began to scatter. Boot beats were coming up the slope toward Petey's place. It was too ideal to be overlooked. The man had suspected nothing between these two rocks. He was too out of breath to shout. Petey grabbed him by the neck and yanked him close. Petey's fist connected perfectly with the fellow's jaw. It was an angled punch. The man sighed and relaxed. Petey hauled him back into the cleft and tied him up. Petey took his position again. He lay still, and the sun again was hot. Time dragged. Dust settled, and nothing could be seen along the wagon road. The sun gradually slanted down the sky. 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock, 3 o'clock. Petey was exhausted. Petey was coming close to the point where he would do anything to break the tension, but wagon wheels broke it. 6 horses in harness and wagon wheels. On the run, the stage was rocketing along this tortuous trail. The overland stage was behind in time, and the driver's whip sizzled and cracked to the right and to the left of the leaders. Petey did not raise up. His ears told him the stage was almost under him. There came a scream of brakes and a volley of words in anger.
Joe, get down and push them goddamn logs off the trail. Hurry it up. This might be...
Brad Thompson's voice was harsh and commanding.
Lift your paws, gents. Grab Sky and shut up.
The wagon creaked as the horses bunched. Petey very carefully raised himself, hatless, to look down. The stage was being flanked by men. Brad Thompson was stepping down from the boulders. His men were watching and closing in. Red bandanas with eye slits in them covering all the faces. The driver had his hands high. The 2 messengers had dropped their rifles to the top of the coach and were also grabbing Sky as ordered.
Out of there, you.
From within came a protest and anger, and then the door hinges creaked, and out stepped a man in a black coat and high-heeled boots. Thompson stepped briskly to the hub of the right front wheel.
Throw down the express box!
The driver very urgently jostled the messenger, and the messenger reached slowly and carefully down to start tipping the box over the edge. Suddenly, some madness gripped the messenger. He grabbed for his Henry rifle, but he never touched its steel. Brad Thompson fired at the range of 10 feet, and half of the messenger's face vanished as he lunged sideways off the box. Petey thrust his rifle ahead, and his voice was strong.
Drop your guns.
Thompson whirled. The others whirled. Brad Thompson saw Petey McGuire up between the boulders. The glimpse was enough. Thompson snapped a slug at the challenging voice, and Petey's whole arm went right numb. And then he pulled his trigger. The smoke was lazy as it followed the bullet, and Brad Thompson suddenly seemed languorous. His Colt pinwheeled on his thumb and dropped. His knees buckled, and he gripped at the wheel with a hand which knew it was dead. Petey levered his Winchester. In the next 10 seconds, the air over his head was thick with the whistle and whine of lead, and thunder rolled through the gorges. Winchester empty, Petey began to lay on with his Colt. And men dropped down there in the road, and other men scrambled for cover. And when the first man began to run, messenger and driver, whipped to fury by the murder of their friend, gripped Henry's and began to pump lead. Thunder rolled in the gorges, and then it echoed back to find the place of ambush still. The passenger was staring up at the cleft with wondering eyes, and then the rest began to look up. Petey got to his feet, and though his checkered shirt was stained, there was a cocky swagger in the way he stood looking down at the men of the overland stage. And then Petey followed, walking free, rifle in his left hand and revolver reloaded in his holster. As he came to the side of the stage, he tipped his hat back. His face was grimy with powder stains, which made the smile startlingly white and frank. He turned Brad Thompson over with his foot. The man's arms flopped out, and the eyes stared at the buzzard, which still wheeled overhead, stared without seeing bird or sky. Petey McGuire whistled shrilly. He did not seem to know he was hurt. In a few seconds, hoofbeats were heard coming out of the canyon, and then Pat swung into sight at a trot, empty stirrups flapping against his flanks. Petey gave Pat a grin and a love tap on the nose, and then moved back to slide his Winchester into its boot. Not until then did he seem to be aware of the astonished stares which were focused upon him. He surveyed them carelessly.
Well, what are you waiting for? Pick up the box and get going. You're hours late.
The man in the black coat looked strangely at Petey McGuire and moved forward, extending his hand. Petey took it indifferently with his left.
Son, I see that you are a ranger by the star, but I'd like to know your name.
Me? Why, I'm Petey McGuire, the toughest ranger in Arizona.
Shocked a little by such immodesty, the man caught sight of the sprawled Brad Thompson's corpse, and then the man smiled slightly.
Yes.
Yeah, that gent was out to get me, a certain captain, but hell with that. Ask anybody in Arizona, they'll tell you who Petey McGuire is, and they'll tell you that I'll be the chief of the Rangers before the year is out.
Is that so?
Yeah.
You think you're old enough?
Me? Age don't have a thing to do with it. I'm Petey McGuire, and I'm tough. And now, if you want to get to Grande Piedras...
Wait, are you really going to be the chief of rangers?
Yeah.
Then if you say you are, I'm no man to mess into fate. Let me be the first to congratulate you.
Huh?
Yes, you see, I'm Ralph Osborne, the new governor of the territory of Arizona.
Although Petey's arm was in a sling, and although he might have swaggered as he dismounted from Pat in the compound at Cristobal, he did not. He walked with confidence, yes, but not with swagger. He exuded confidence, yes, but not cockiness. There was something very real and certain about every move he made, something very frank about the way he smiled. The old Petey and the new Petey had met at last on common ground. And so Pete McGuire moved up the steps to Shannon's office as naturally as a confident man ever moved. Shannon was waiting. He had known for 2 hours that McGuire was on his way, and in those 2 hours, Shannon had gone through hell. He was tired, Shannon, tired and old, and death was close at hand. Pete McGuire came up to the desk and sat down on its corner. He was aware of a girl in white standing at the door, but he did not dare turn, not yet. He did not dare let them know that he knew. He had something to say.
Shannon, you're through.
Shannon looked up at the youngster. There was nothing granite about Shannon now. He was just an old man sitting in a creaky chair.
You wanted the post of Chief Ranger. You've lost it because I'm that man. Yes, you probably heard about it already because I had to get patched up.
Please, McGuire. I was out of my head. I didn't know what I was doing. I tell you freely that you were right. I was trying to put you out.
Shut up. I don't want to hear about it because I know about it. But I can't blame you much. Reputation, daughter, job. Yeah, you saw them going.
Shannon was whipped, and he knew it. He was quiet.
But you're through here too. You're no longer a ranger captain.
I got it coming.
No, you'll never be the chief of the Rangers, and you're through here at this job because...
Please.
But an astounding thing had happened. Petey had stretched forward his left hand, and Shannon, not understanding, took it hesitantly.
Because we are sending you as the next senator from Arizona to the United States Capitol at Washington. And Pop, let me be the first to congratulate you.
Petey didn't want to see tears in a hard man's eyes, so he turned and walked toward Beth, who waited for him there by the door.